This is Senator Adam Hollier. This is the We Can Do Better podcast, and I have the distinct pleasure, and I'm just super excited to have my friend Rachael Eubanks, who is the state treasurer, and I will say it proudly, my very favorite department director. So I like many of the others, but Rachael's my favorite, primarily just because I think we have a great connection on how we think about things. So Rachael, if you want to introduce yourself, and we can get going.
Yeah, well, Rachael Eubanks, State Treasurer. I also am very excited about having this conversation with you, Senator. Thank you for having this podcast for us to be able to tell our stories and be able to connect with people. I think this is phenomenal. But in terms of being your favorite, I'm sure you say that to all the directors. So,
but it's cool. So Rachael, where are you from? How'd you get involved? Like, you have a really unique story, and when we think about glass ceilings, I don't think people think about state treasurer as one, but it certainly is one, and is one that I don't think we speak enough about kind of finances and your name being on all the checks and you signing it and you really being responsible for the money in our state and how different that is in Michigan versus kind of every other state across the country.
Sure. So I'm a Michigander at heart. I was born and raised in East Lansing, Michigan, where actually I live today. I did go to the University of Michigan, which, by East Lansing standards is a very controversial statement, but, my family has real recently just let me back to Thanksgiving. So I'm looking forward to be able to talk to all my fellow Spartans, but I'm fortunate that I've had a lot of really great role models to look up to. My mother was kind of a live-in role model. She worked for the Department of Treasury, actually back in the 80s and 90s. So,
wow.
It was her example that I got to see, my mom, getting up every day, carrying a briefcase to work, having, a very kind of typical, finance story kind of set that example for me. So when it became time for me to think about what I wanted to do, I knew I always enjoyed math and science and all of those technical things. And as I got into college and started thinking about what I wanted to do, I was interested in political science. I was interested in business school. I was interested in, briefly in pre-med, but I took organic chemistry and saw some cadaver labs, and neither one of those went well for me. So I knew I had to go the math and science route. And really kind of fell in love with economics, because economics combines a lot of these things. It's the study of how we make decisions. It looks at, individual decisions from, both a kind of a micro level and a macro level, and how we all deal with having scarce resources, which I loved. And so that kind of set me up for my first position in what we call public finance. So public finance, we work on bond issues for units of government, nonprofits, school districts, colleges, universities, nonprofit healthcare, to help them be able to execute on their capital goals through borrowing in the capital markets. So that was kind of my, introduction into that. But before, I wouldn't have known about going in that field if it wasn't for my mom setting that example for me. So I was fortunate to kind of have her front and center and learning how to do that. And then, of course, having had the experience in Treasury and working, through my career, I ended up working as a contractor for the department for a number of years, and got to work with 4 different state treasurers during that period of time, and got to see how, these individual finance decisions, how they make a difference and how they make, significant impacts in people's everyday lives. And, through that process, I got to see everything from how these decisions are made, from, all of the pieces that kind of go into that. And so then when I kind of changed gears a little bit and went to the Public Service Commission, where I was a utility regulator for a few years, which I loved. I still had the finance piece come with that.
Let me just pause you there, because now you're talking about a whole industry that people just don't know about. So you got this kind of finance base and had this incredible background, and you were marketable. And so you ended up regulating utilities. So, you want to tell everybody what it's like working at MPSC, because most people are complaining about their utility bill already and how it looks and all those kind of things, and don't really understand the role that the MPSC plays for it, or that there was even a Black woman who sat on that board and was thinking about them from a similar life experience.
So great question, and kind of it's a very big shift. It appears on paper to be a big shift in my career, but it really isn't. For anybody that maybe doesn't know exactly what they want to do, but maybe is interested in how decisions are made, finance is a great way to look at a lot of different things. Regardless of if you want to do healthcare or sports or any kind of the energy, these big industries, at the foundation of it, there's usually big financial decisions being made. And in the case of utilities in general, that is an incredibly capital intensive business. I mean, they're making billions of dollars of investments, working with investors, and all of that in what we call a regulated monopoly in Michigan. That's the model that we have. That's your DTEs and your consumers, energies of the world. They are, working with their regulator to try to figure out, okay, how are we going to pay for these investments going forward? So they file, what they call rate cases. The commission kind of becomes this 3-member little mini energy Supreme Court, where you look through the entire filing that the utility puts forward and decide whether or not these investments you feel are reasonable and prudent is a regulatory term that you use, and justified. And should you approve those? Because if you do decide to approve those, that goes in everybody's bills, all of their millions of customers and their bills. So it's having that financial background for me. Even though I learned the energy piece kind of on the job, so much of it was financially driven. It was a very easy transition for me to make. A lot of those fundamentals were part of that. But yeah, I mean, we looked at, the customers that we serve throughout Michigan. It was probably, it's the vast majority of customers, utility customers in Michigan, that actually are impacted through actions that the Public Service Commission takes. So if you ever have an issue, if anyone that has a utility issue, they're also there to help and to mediate issues between you as a customer and utilities. So if you didn't know that they're available, they're always available to help you kind of, work through those issues.
Yeah. So that's awesome. It's so cool that you have this kind of richness of experience. I think often people are like, well, how do you get that first space? Like, how did you get your first job in finance? It's one of those fields where I think every day we start talking about kind of diversifying it, and that there are not enough Black people and certainly not enough Black women in leadership roles in finance. You talked a little bit about mentors and mentorship. How did you get your first space? How does someone say, hey, I want to be Rachael Eubanks when I grow up?
So I would say the number one theme of my career has been networking and building your networks, building those relationships, because they're critically important whether you're starting your career or you're trying to make a transition in your career. I was fortunate in, my mother, who I talked about, who worked at Department of Treasury in the 80s and 90s, she faced all kinds of sexism in her everyday life. And so did, all of the pioneers that were very similar to her. And they decided that they wanted to form an organization to support one another. So they formed an organization called Women in Public Finance. And there was a Michigan offshoot called Michigan Women in Finance. And that was a space where women could learn from each other, to support each other as they grew, and to, kind of rise up through this fellowship of women to kind of break through these barriers that we're talking about. Because, you really need support as you're going through this, and as you're a pioneer and you're making those strides. So as, she kind of created those, was around the time that I was coming into the industry. So I was able to, get engaged with those groups very early in my career. And, when positions became available, you can, you're not a stranger. You're not just an application in a stack of applications for a very competitive finance job, right? These people know when their application comes in for entry-level positions, they get stacks and stacks of applications in investment banking. And, for you to stand out to say, hey, I know this person, that's the first step to getting in the door. Then the second step is, of course, knowing your stuff. You still have to, do the work. My first interview I ever had, I actually remember this very well. It was, a normal interview, conversational interview. And then they said, okay, well, we're done. This, by the way, was a surprise. And I need you to do these calculations in the spreadsheet. So, I had to have that background and knowledge to be able to actually, do the calculations appropriately and correctly, kind of on the spot and under surprise, to be able to demonstrate that I could do the job. So I would say it's a combination of those two things, building that network, building visibility for yourself, and then, having the technical knowledge and expertise that once you're there, you can perform and, kind of make good on everyone that's spoken for you along the way.
Well, that's awesome. And speaking of visibility, I'm excited to kind of talk to you in this space. I hear this may be your first time on a podcast doing this kind of thing.
Yeah, we were joking kind of when we were logging in here about, the modern ways of communication here. And despite all those modern ways, the podcast is the first one. I've done all kinds of, radio and old-fashioned media, but I'm now being entered into the 21st century. So thank you for that, Senator.
I'm very excited about it. And, kind of this as another medium and space for folks to kind of get to know you and get to know you the way that I have. And so for all of everybody who's tuning in, Rachel's a person who I text in the middle of the night with my crazy ideas. I'm like, hey, I was listening to this podcast, so I was reading this article, or I had this dream about this thing. Could we do that? And she's like, one, she's always awake. I don't know how that's possible, but she's always awake and always like, yeah, we could think about that, and like has this very thought out discussion, whether we're talking about issuing new bond initiatives or debt ceilings or internet, like just very, very knowledgeable about these kind of things. And I think as you talk about having expertise, that's what's really cool about you in this space. And so can you talk a little bit about what the governor relies on you for? Like, what do people ask you in your, official role? Like, what are the kind of things that you're responsible for that you do for the citizens of Michigan?
So that's a great question. And you actually touched on this a little bit earlier, which is how does Michigan Treasury differ from treasuries across the country? Well, and I think there's kind of two big areas to start with on that. I mean, first is I am appointed by the governor. I'm a member of the governor's cabinet. Across the country, many of my counterparts, when I talk to my treasurer, colleagues in Oregon or Nevada or Massachusetts, they're elected. They actually have statewide elections where they, are on the ballot, just like, the governor. And they have to win election and then re-election. And a lot of times the correlation with that is those offices tend to be smaller. They tend to be smaller treasuries, so have a very limited scope of responsibilities to do. In Michigan, we have a very broad scope, a wide scope of responsibilities that we focus on. So we focus on economic and revenue forecasting. So that's all the money that the state starts with as you head into the budget process when it gets divvied up into how it's going to be spent and expenditures are made. We have college savings plans. We have, all the higher education grants and scholarship support for the state.
Those higher education grants. I mean, I know that Michigan has a really cool program that parents like myself could opt into. What is that program?
So we have a couple. We have the MESP program, which is a College Savings 529 program, and it just makes it really easy to save for college for either your children or other family members. And I'm really proud about this one. Actually, yesterday there's this national ranking called Morningstar that rates all of these programs across the country. And Michigan, for the very first time, became one of 3 states to have a gold rating on our College Savings 529 program. So that means we've got low fees. That means we've made it easy for you to invest and a great way to kind of put away dollars for the future. We also have a different program, which is called the MET, the Michigan Education Trust. This is probably the one that you see the most on the billboards with the owl. And that allows you to really buy educational contracts. So you're essentially buying, your tuition contracts today to be used tomorrow. And, over time that can result in some significant savings depending on the educational institution that you choose. So that's a big, big piece of what we do. We also invest all of the state's pension and retirement funds for all of the state employees and public school teachers. So that is about $100 billion in assets under investment that we handle at Treasury. We manage the state's balance sheets in relationship with rating agencies. We have responsibility over state and local government financial health. And we also, kind of service the state's bank, the checkbook. Like anytime payments need to go out, we make sure that we are, getting those out in a timely manner to those who need it. And I mean, there's a number of other
those checks.
Sorry?
I said, does your name appear on those checks?
Actually, you know what? They do. It does. We live in a different world though, where direct deposit is the most common and frequent way that people get money. But if you do get a paper check, yes, it'll be my signature on that check, which is a little bit surreal every time I see that. But yes, that is the case.
How many times did it take you writing your signature before you felt good about it?
So it's funny. There's this big authentication process where you have to go through with the bank. I mean, they don't just let anybody send in their signature and say I'm the state treasurer. You have to, sign it a bunch of times. And I think I can't remember how many times it was, 15 times. And they do some homogenization and then pick your, whatever's the one that's like the most telling of your unique signature. So that was, who knew?
Well, now everyone knows, I guess. That's cool. And so I just kind of chuckled because as someone else who went to public school, people always tease me about my handwriting. And I'm like, I was kind of shrug my shoulders and say, hey, I went to public school. It's kind of this thing. As young people are like, cursive? No, not a thing.
It's a lost art, but I enjoy writing a handwritten note or card every now and then just to make sure I don't lose those skills there.
Yeah, I have a whole drawer full of stamps here for just that reason, because you got to write people notes. They value such things.
Right? No, absolutely. It's a nice little token that people still enjoy getting.
Yeah. But so, I mean, as we talk a little bit about kind of, what you do in an official capacity, what should people be thinking about? Like, let's say I'm 14, 15, 16, 17. I'm like, that's what I want to do. I want to be her. What advice do you give them?
Well, first of all, try to figure out what you can do to get exposure to this industry early. I mean, really the networking, the building of those relationships, you just can't replace that time. I was fortunate that had those networking opportunities through my mom. Those relationships that I had growing up are, ones that I can even call on today. So I think it's really important to kind of get out there, get your name. And then if you don't have somebody built in as a mentor, like I do, how do you find one? I mean, try to get engaged with, your college's alumni association. Oftentimes, there'll be people that are doing work that's similar that you might be interested in, or maybe something you've even never heard of, and you just want to learn about what is that. That's a great way to do that. I don't know if those mentoring relationships extend into high school. You mentioned 16 or 17, they should. Really, that's the time I think when, nowadays, most people are making their decisions on what they're going to do. I think Senator, being a little bit older in generation, I mean, we could wait. I didn't have to really declare my major until the end of my sophomore year, and I didn't. I mean, I mentioned I kind of flirted with a career in healthcare and ended up deciding to go with finance. But, I mean, it's very challenging, I think, for young people to be able to figure that out. So what their expectation is to know early. So try to find people that, do, and hey, if you have to cold call them, email them. I mean, I do that. I take, random emails that come in, people that say, hey, I just want, 5 or 10 minutes of your time to hear about your day and what you do. Could you give that to me? And that's something that I always love to do. And so, if that comes out of today, I think that would be wonderful. I'd love to have more people, young people reach out and want to, head into this world, because we need more people that look like me, that look like us in these roles and making these decisions, because that representation really matters. And unless you're aware that this career is out there, you may not pursue it. And so, we've got to, I take it as a personal responsibility. I know you do too, Senator, to, say, okay, I'm going to take my personal responsibility to give people that, exposure so that they know how they can ascend to those positions.
So in this kind of moment of COVID-19, I know we've talked a great deal about the budget and how it works, and should we be borrowing more? Should we, there's always this idea of Keynesian economics or Reaganomics, or like supply side, demand side. I think that people have spoken a great deal about what the economy is doing. And at the national level, people hear the Fed chairman talking about what should be going on with the economy, and him really speaking about currency. At the state level, that's you, right? Like, you're the closest equivalent we have on something like that. What is Treasury doing? What should people be doing? How should we be thinking about this moment as it relates to state and municipal financing?
It's a great question, because we've dealt with in the last, 6, 7, 8 months, the most uncertainty in this area. I mean, we've dealt with, and I hate using this word unprecedented because we've overused it now, but it's so true. There's not an economic recession we can look to that really reflects this in any way. Yeah. The last time we've seen a pandemic of this magnitude was over 100 years ago. And, our economy, the way that we are globalized, the way that we, actually make purchases and decisions, and the way that we can interact with one another, all those things have changed dramatically from 100 years ago. So trying to figure out, okay, what is happening, with our economy has been, I say, an incredible challenge over the last, 7 or 8 months. Heading into this, our fundamentals, our GDP as a state, our unemployment rate, our manufacturing rates, housing statistics, all of those things are reflective of a very severe economy. But what we found out is a couple of months in is that those revenues are not necessarily following suit. And so we had to figure out, what was going on. Well, it turns out there's all these other things going on. People are getting stimulus. People are getting the paycheck. Businesses are getting the Paycheck Protection Program. People are getting enhanced unemployment benefits, that extra $600 a week. They're getting stimulus checks from the federal government. all of those things are kind of propping up our spending in ways that we, maybe didn't anticipate in the front end of the recession. So we had to pivot and say, acknowledge it and say, okay, well, we're going to, make these adjustments to our forecast and look at it going forward. So it's a very difficult challenge. It's a challenge that impacts a lot of people, but I think, it's something that, we are enjoying trying to figure out so that we can help those that are on the budget side make decisions. So, once we get the revenue pictures right, then, it's up to the governor, and the legislature, state budget office, others to decide, okay, how is it actually going to be divvied up? So that's kind of where our line stops, is once we figure out what that revenue number is. But that's, I would say your question is the most similar to, what's happening on the federal level. Really what's happening at the federal policy level has a tremendous impact on what's happening to us as a state.
Cool. Well, we'll kind of pivot back to just Rachael Eubanks person in this moment where everyone is kind of grappling with isolation and being, just the changes from COVID-19. What are you doing for your mental health? What are you doing to stay sane and keep that smile on your face like normal?
I just generally, I think, have a little bit of an upbeat attitude. I think you probably have to when you're in the public sphere, because, these are challenging decisions that you make that impact a lot of people. And, you can, if there's something that goes wrong, you can receive a lot of criticism. So you have to kind of, keep that positivity and belief in what you're doing and why you're doing this, moving this forward. So that's just my natural disposition, first of all. But other than that, I've done things that I think a lot of people are doing. The number one thing is keeping in touch, reaching out, trying to have, I do the same thing everyone else does. I do the, Zoom or FaceTime happy hours with friends, or, try to, figure out ways, well, while the weather was warm, to go see family and backyards and things like that. But it's really just connecting with people that has been the most important part for me during this, to kind of keep that, positivity going, and a reminder of like why we're all doing this. When you're sitting in your house all day, it seems like it's just you, right? But that reminder that, there's this whole big world out there has always kept me, kind of on the positive side of things.
That's great. And you do look the same. And maybe that's why I like you so much. It's like we're the only two people in the room, like with big smiles, like, hey, how's it going? What are you watching on TV or internet or YouTube? Like, what are you watching?
So I just finished the first season, actually it's the only season on Apple TV Plus, of Ted Lasso, which is a Jason Sudeikis of Saturday Night Live fame, who is a American football coach who gets hired by an English soccer team, and he knows nothing about soccer, or of course, their football.
Yeah.
And so it's a hilarious story of him kind of learning that, but him, having this, personality and this leadership that everyone just still identifies with, even though, he's the first person to acknowledge that he doesn't know the first thing about, soccer. It was hilarious. And it was a nice, I think, reflection of, how we can, even if you don't feel like you're an expert in something, and if you're going to take on a leadership position, you're not always going to be an expert.
Right.
But, how are you going to lead your team, and how are you going to, stay positive and focused on that? And, I always look for these little like life lessons through these shows that I watch, which is kind of funny. And that one I just finished. So then started the Right Stuff on Disney Plus, which is the story of the Mercury 7 astronauts, and, the first kind of American human space exploration. And there, I think, 4 episodes in right now. And it's really, really interesting. As someone that's always loved the space program and kind of seeing behind the scenes and the stuff that they did then, when they had like slide rules and, they're sketching stuff out in chalkboard and scraps of paper, and they're doing math, they're checking each other's math with abacuses by hand. And they still, were able to launch that. I just think is just mind boggling compared to all the technology that we have today. Our smartphones have more computing power than the entire NASA program did combined back in those days. So it was pretty, I love those kind of space stories.
People always say that, and it always seems troubling to me. I'm like, I don't know. Is that supposed to make me feel more or less comfortable with where we're at in the world? But I guess neither here nor there. So from, me, I'm all about the exercise life. Are you getting any? Are you out and about? Are you at the gym inside? How are you staying active in this moment?
Yeah, I do have a Peloton bike. I'm I'm blessed to have that. I've actually had it for a number of years, but I will hop on that, most days of the week and try to just, kind of work it out a little bit after you just sit in one place all day. I mean, when you're in the office, you're up, you're going to other people's offices, I'm walking downtown, I'm walking, to the Binsfeld, I'm walking all kinds of different places. But, most of the day I just sit here. So now, I found it more and more important to actually get my body moving throughout the day. I mean, you get tight and sore if you don't do that. And so I've made it a priority. And quite frankly, it's just entertainment. I enjoy, kind of listening to the instructors and being on the leaderboard with all the different people. And I probably did 100 rides in my first 3 years of owning that bike. And then this last year, I probably done like 150 rides. I mean, it's been just a savior during this time.
Yeah, it's super funny. So I'm a big cycling fan. And so like I would watch the Tour de France. And when they first came out with them, I was like, this is so dumb. Why would anybody want this thing? Because it seemed like a very niche market of like ride the Tour de France races. And then now it's become this like very popular like community thing where before it was just like, you can ride the same route that they're riding a Tour de France on this very expensive exercise bike. It's like, I have a bike trainer. I can just watch and ride along. It's like, but then they like kind of built this community and the classes. And I think that's really made it really valuable. And I think in this pandemic, people have been looking for Pelotons like crazy. So
yeah, it's a great way to connect with people. I mean, it is really, it's a way to kind of cheer each other on and all be connected to trying to accomplish a similar positive goal, which, is always good.
Yeah. Just another way where you were ahead of the curve, making a good long-term investment where you're ready for when you were going to be stuck indoors. And,
I got lucky on that one. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what all good investors say. Like Warren Buffett will be like, yeah, I'm just lucky. It's like, yeah, you get lucky one time, that's lucky. You get lucky 3 times, that's something different. Anywho, but thank you so much for joining us for the podcast. Is there anything else you want to tell our listeners, tuner inner people, just before we let you go?
Yeah, I mean, just one thing. I mean, I wanted any young person or anybody looking to make a change in their career that looks at, Senator Hollier or me or anybody else that has been on this podcast or anyone that you see in leadership positions. Just because you haven't seen somebody that looks like you doesn't mean you can't do it. You can absolutely be the first one. You can, it takes some fortitude. Don't get me wrong. If you haven't seen anyone that looks like you and you're trying to push through the first time, it can be hard. So try to build people around you, try to build a great support system, and make sure to reach out to other people that can help you along the way.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. This is the State Treasurer, Rachael Eubanks, and this has been the We Can Do Better podcast. And we are so grateful to have had her and look forward to telling some other really important stories about wonderful people doing great work in Michigan and in the 2nd Senate District.
Yeah. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.